5 years ago, they didn't just cast me out, they erased me. My name, my place, my voice, my family, the ones who should have fought for me, silenced me instead. They laughed behind closed doors. They lied without blinking. And when I didn't fold under the weight of their shame, they buried me in the kind of silence that screams. But the thing about being buried alive, you learn how to claw your way back, bloodied, bruised, breathless. And you don't rise empty-handed. So when the invitation came, thick, cream-colored, obnoxiously elegant, I didn't just see paper and gold leaf. I saw nerves. I saw a family bold enough to think they could pretend nothing had happened. That I'd smile and pose for their photographers like the past hadn't set fire to everything. But I wasn't here for revenge. Not tonight. Tonight, I was here to reclaim the story they tried to burn at the roots. Before we go further, let me ask you something. If your family tried to erase your name, would you walk away for good? Or would you walk straight back into the fire? That day had already drained the marrow from my bones. It was one of those grinding courthouse afternoons where every ruling felt like dragging justice uphill. The air in Charleston was heavy with heat and dust, the kind that clings to your skin like old regrets. When I pushed open the door to my apartment downtown, golden hour light poured across the floors, warm, inviting. But the place still felt cold, still lonely. I kicked off my heels, letting them thud against the baseboard, and dropped my briefcase onto the old oak table. The mail fanned out messily across the surface. Bills, junk flyers, the usual detritus of daily life. A coupon for a seafood joint I'd never try. And then there it was, a thick envelope, cream paper, gold embossing, the Marin family crest. My breath caught. My hand froze midair. The room seemed to tighten around that small space between my fingers and the envelope. That crest, sharp and proud, the kind you'd expect from old Southern bloodlines trying to convince the world they're still royalty. I hadn't seen it since the night I walked out. 5 years ago, the night Jameson, my brother, stood in front of the entire Marin clan and toasted to my humiliation. The night no one stopped him. Not my father. Not my mother. Especially not my mother. My hands itched. I wiped them on my skirt, like the memory had left grime on my skin, and reached for the envelope. It was absurdly formal. Gold wax seal. Raised lettering. Like it had come straight from Buckingham Palace instead of a family who treated me like a disgrace. I traced the letters of my name. Odessa Marin. Slow. Deliberate. Then I reached for the letter opener. The wax cracked open with a sharp snap. The scent of expensive paper and older memories spilled out in tandem. Inside, a wedding invitation so ornate it teetered on vulgar. You are cordially invited to the marriage of Jameson Marin and Catherine Walsh. My stomach turned. Jameson, the golden boy. The heir. The spotless son with the Marin name stitched to his destiny. The future of the family's precious medical dynasty. And Catherine Walsh? Nothing. Her name stirred nothing. Probably some carefully selected debutante with a polished smile and a LinkedIn-perfect resume. Another cog in the family image machine. I laid the invitation down with care, like it might detonate if I moved too quickly. But something else slipped out of the envelope, something unexpected. A lined piece of notebook paper. No seal. No frills. My mother's handwriting. Shaky. Urgent. Please come. I miss you. They don't know I'm writing you. Mom. My chest caved in for a moment. Her. The same woman who sat silent while Jameson raised that glass and called me a disgrace. The same woman who didn't lift a finger as I packed my life into a suitcase in front of everyone. And now this desperate hidden note, like contraband smuggled out of a prison camp. The room tilted. I reached for the edge of the counter, gripping the cool marble to anchor myself. My fingers instinctively went to the charm around my neck, the small silver gavel my grandfather had given me the day I passed the bar. He'd pressed it into my palm and said, "You're enough, Odessa. Just as you are." I touched it to my lips, not even sure if it was for strength or to stop myself from falling apart. Memories came crashing back. Fists to the chest. It was Thanksgiving. 5 years ago. Jameson, already a few glasses in, clinked his wine goblet against Dad's scotch, his voice loud and thick with contempt. "She thinks she's too good for us now," he laughed, the sound slicing through the polite conversation of cousins and uncles. Trading stethoscopes for subpoenas. Trading blood for strangers' gratitude. What a damn disgrace. Laughter followed, uneasy, stifled. A cough. Silverware scraping plates. And Mom? She just sat there. Her eyes shined, but her lips were tight. And Dad, he wouldn't even look at me. I stood there, 29 years old, and felt like a kid being scolded in front of the entire school. Alone. No defense. No rescue. That night, I packed everything I could into my car and drove away without looking back. Until now. I blinked, snapping myself out of the memory. The invitation still sat under the kitchen light, smug and shimmering like it knew exactly what it was doing. Was this a performance? A PR stunt to pretend history hadn't happened? Or worse, was it a trap to drag me back just to humiliate me again? The RSVP card sat there, blank. Expectant. God, part of me wanted to tear it all up. Burn it. Scatter the ashes. But another part, the part that still ached on Christmas mornings. The part that still wondered if anyone ever whispered my name when I wasn't around. The part that hadn't stopped hoping someone might say, "Come home." Not for them. For me. Because maybe it was time. Time to stop letting their silence decide my worth. My phone buzzed against the counter, cutting through the quiet. I snatched it up, my thumb already hovering over Maya's name. My anchor. My sister in everything but blood. I didn't let myself think. I just typed, "Maya, should I walk back into the lion's den?" I paused, just long enough to feel the gravity of it. Then hit send. The city outside buzzed, a siren in the distance, a low bass thumping from a passing car. Life, indifferent, moving on. I tucked the note back into the envelope and slid it into my briefcase. Closed my eyes. Whatever came next, one thing was crystal clear. The Marin family had no idea who they were inviting back. And the question clung to the air like smoke on glass. Should I walk back into the lion's den? I didn't have the answer yet. But I knew I was going to find it. They say time heals everything. That the farther you get from a wound, the less it aches. They're wrong. Some wounds don't fade. They ferment. They harden. They become bone-deep truths you carry in silence. That night, the one that changed everything, still clings to me. I can smell it. I can feel it. It was Thanksgiving. 5 years ago. I was fresh off a last-minute arraignment, still in my courthouse heels, my jacket wrinkled from racing across the parking lot. Public defender. God, just saying it at a Marin dinner table felt like profanity. I arrived late, breathless, my shoes scuffed, my presence barely acknowledged as I slipped into the far end of the dining table like a ghost. The estate was buzzing with its usual self-congratulatory pomp. Gold-trimmed place cards, mahogany chairs, imported wine, candles flickering just a bit too sweet, their scent mixing with the turkey and the lies. Every Marin was there. Cousins, second cousins, business partners disguised as family friends. A crowd packed tighter than a boardroom, every one of them drunk on legacy. I was barely seated when Jameson saw me. He caught my eye from across the table, that familiar glint in his eyes. It was the kind of gleam that always meant someone was about to bleed, and this time it was going to be me. The night dragged on like a play I couldn't walk out of. Toasts began, one after another. Dad led with a speech about gratitude and tradition, his voice warm but practiced. Then Uncle Mark piped in about promotions, new homes, babies on the way. Polite applause, champagne flowing like applause, and then Jameson stood. His voice was rich, too smooth, the kind of charm you only hear when there's poison underneath. Some of us, he said, choose to serve the community. I should have known. I should have braced. His eyes locked onto mine across the table, and that slow, crooked grin curled at the corners of his mouth. Others, he continued, choose to shame the family legacy. A few nervous chuckles bubbled from the table. Someone cleared their throat. Silverware clinked against porcelain. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just sat there with the turkey on my plate going cold. Jameson was only getting started. He raised his glass like a damn ringmaster. "She thinks she's too good for us now," he said, laughing into his wine. Swapping stethoscopes for subpoenas. Trading blood for strangers' gratitude. What a disgrace. More laughter. This time louder. Bolder. As if permission had been granted to mock me freely. I searched the faces around the table. My mother clutching her wineglass, eyes watery, but her mouth a sealed tomb. My father, focused intently on the floral centerpiece like it might rescue him from having to look at me. No one said a word. Not one. And in that moment, silence screamed louder than any insult ever could. I folded my napkin. Slowly. Precisely. Like it mattered. Set it gently on my plate. Then I stood. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. Hell, no one even flinched. My legs moved on autopilot, but my chest was splintering. By the time I reached the driveway, my hands were shaking so violently I couldn't get my keys into the ignition. It took 3 tries. And when the engine finally roared to life, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just drove. That was the last Marin gathering I ever attended. No calls. No apologies. Just silence. The kind that buries you whole. Not once did anyone ask why I left. Not once. I drained the last of my whiskey and set the glass down on the counter with more force than necessary. The sharp clink echoed through my apartment like a verdict. And still, that damn envelope sat on the table. The RSVP card peeking out like it had the nerve to ask, "Are you coming?" I stared at it unmoving. This wasn't just about a wedding. It wasn't even about Jameson. It was about me. And that aching, persistent whisper that kept asking if I still belonged somewhere, if I ever did. There was a time I would have taken that silence as an answer. But I'm not her anymore. I reached for my laptop, heart still hammering in my chest. If I was going to walk into that wedding, I needed to know exactly who Catherine Walsh was. Not just the name. I needed context. I needed clarity. I pulled up court records, bar association bios, public filings, everything. It didn't take long. Catherine Walsh wasn't just a pretty placeholder. She wasn't some airbrushed blonde plucked from the Marin-approved debutante roster. No. She was a real lawyer. A damn good one. Housing rights specialist. Advocate for low-income tenants. She'd gone up against slumlords, big developers, corrupt zoning boards. And then my breath caught. 8 months ago. A case. My courtroom. It hit me like a thunderclap. She had stood right in front of me, fierce and relentless, defending a cluster of tenants from eviction. I remember her, sharp, articulate, gutsy. She hadn't backed down once. And she'd won. Back then, there hadn't been even a flicker of recognition. No mention of Jameson. No Marin smugness. Just a woman standing for what was right. And now, she was marrying the man who once raised a glass to my destruction? The irony was suffocating. Jameson, the loyal son who accused me of betraying the family, marrying a woman who practically idolized the judge he tried to erase? I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, heart pounding like a drumline against my ribs. Maybe the universe had a sense of humor after all. The clock ticked softly from the kitchen wall, a slow rhythm like a countdown. My eyes fell again on the RSVP card. This time my hand didn't shake, not even a little. I reached for a pen. In one smooth, deliberate stroke, I wrote the words that would change everything. I'll be there. No hesitation. No second-guessing. I folded the card neatly, slid it back into the return envelope, pressed the seal closed. Let them expect a quiet return. Let them imagine a prodigal daughter bowing her head for the photo ops. Let them. But they have no idea who's walking through that door. The woman they tried to bury is gone. I'm not coming back to beg. I'm coming back to remind them who they erased. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft creaks of the old apartment settling around me, like it too was unsure how to hold the weight of everything. By morning, the envelope was still sitting on the kitchen table, right where I'd left it. Sealed. Stamped. Ready. I held it for a moment longer than necessary, my fingers brushing the smooth paper, then slipped it into my briefcase. I didn't look back as I shut the door behind me. The Charleston streets were wrapped in a heavy, gray stillness. That kind of coastal hush that pressed low against the skin and promised rain, but didn't quite deliver. I didn't head straight for the courthouse. I turned left at the main intersection instead, letting the car glide through familiar roads I hadn't driven in years. I knew exactly where I was going. The Marin family cemetery was tucked just outside the city, behind a rusted iron fence tangled with ivy and lined with ancient oak trees that whispered to one another in the breeze. Gravel crunched beneath my tires as I pulled into the lot. The moment I stepped out, something shifted in my chest. That old weight again. The grief, the memories, the unfinished conversations that never got to happen. I reached for the bouquet of lilies on the passenger seat. Fresh. Simple. I'd picked them up just after dawn, wrapping the stems in a bit of brown paper like Grandpa would have liked. I walked slowly up the gentle hill to the far corner of the grounds, the wind catching loose strands of my hair as I went. There he was, Judge Elias Marin, my grandfather, the only one who never tried to fix me or shrink me to fit a mold. His headstone had weathered with time, soft around the edges, but still strong. I knelt beside it and brushed a few dead leaves from the base, setting the flowers gently against the stone. He used to say, "Justice without fear. Integrity without compromise." Words that had felt too big when I was younger, but had since become my compass. I sat back on my heels and closed my eyes, letting the quiet settle around me. I could still hear his voice in the back of my mind, that low, calm cadence that always made me feel seen. Then, from the inside pocket of my jacket, I pulled out a small yellowed envelope. It had lived there for years. He'd handed it to me during one of our last visits, when the cancer had stolen most of his strength, but not his fire. "When you need it most," he'd said, and left it at that. Well, if not now, then when? My hands trembled as I broke the brittle seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. His handwriting was a little shaky, but still his. "Real power isn't loud, Savannah. It's in standing tall without needing to push others down. You won't always be their favorite. You weren't born to be. You were born to outgrow them." The words hit like a wave. All these years I'd twisted myself in knots trying to explain myself, defend myself, make them see me. But Grandpa had seen it, long before I did. He knew I didn't belong in their glass castle, built on old money and quiet cruelty. He knew I was meant to build something real. I tucked the letter back into its envelope and slipped it into my briefcase. Then I reached for the small silver pendant around my neck, the Lady Justice charm Grandpa had promised me when I passed the bar. Not for show. Not for legacy. For me. The first drops of rain landed on the back of my hand like a whisper. Gentle. Almost reverent. I stood slowly, brushed the damp from my skirt, and made my way back to the car. By the time I pulled into the courthouse, the clouds had broken into a steady drizzle. I climbed the marble steps, nodding to the bailiffs and clerks, their faces buried in paperwork and routine. The rhythm of it all, the formality, the pace, the order, it grounded me. But just as I turned the corner toward my chambers, I heard it. A voice. Soft. Cautious. Familiar. "That's her, Judge Hart." I slowed, pretending to review the docket in my hand. Catherine Walsh said it herself, someone whispered. "Half the cases she wins now, it's because she studied Judge Hart's rulings inside and out." I didn't look up, didn't smile, didn't break stride. But inside, something shifted. That's the thing about being erased. When you carve your way back, the truth doesn't just resurface, it echoes. Catherine, the woman marrying my brother. She had studied me. Not him. Not their dynasty. Me. The one they tried to bury. I stepped into my chambers, closed the door behind me, and let the silence bloom. A low, grim smile curled at the edge of my mouth. Let them toast their perfect image. Let them rehearse their polished narratives. But I'm still here. And this time, I'm not just attending the wedding. I'm walking in with the truth. The next morning, I didn't head for the courthouse. I woke early. The rain from the night before dried into a low, stubborn mist that clung to the sidewalks like a memory that hadn't fully settled. I stood in front of my closet for longer than I should have, staring blankly at rows of suits, skirts, neutral-tone dresses. None of it felt quite right. Because this wasn't about clothes, not really. It was about armor. About choosing which version of myself I wanted to carry into the next battle. After a while, I reached for a simple black sheath dress, structured but soft, powerful without posturing, and slipped it on with a pair of low heels polished to a quiet shine. I fastened the silver chain around my neck, letting the Lady Justice pendant rest just below my collarbone. It felt heavier than usual today, like it remembered what I was walking into. The drive took me along the edges of Charleston, past the pastel townhomes and blooming jasmine and that faint trace of salt hanging on the air from the harbor. I barely noticed any of it. My mind was a slow churn of thought and memory, the kind that builds tension in your shoulders before you even realize you're bracing. I didn't need directions. My hands knew the way instinctively, like some cruel muscle memory. When I pulled through the wrought iron gates of the Marin estate, the sight of it hit me like a punch I should have expected, but still hadn't prepared for. The house loomed, grand and sterile, all white columns and pride. There were already cars in the circular drive, sleek, expensive, some rented just for show, and as I stepped out, the soft hum of forced laughter drifted through the open windows. My heels clicked against the flagstone as I made my way toward the entrance, the RSVP still tucked in my clutch like a sealed dare. I crossed the threshold, and it was like time folded in on itself. The same scent of polished wood and imported lilies. The same too cold air meant to preserve furniture and reputations. I handed my coat to a server dressed in white and moved through the front hall slowly, letting my eyes scan the familiar portraits lining the walls. Jameson as a baby, Jameson in his college graduation gown, Jameson cutting the ribbon at the new pediatric wing, his face locked in legacy. My face, of course, was nowhere. I drifted toward the side parlor, drawn by the sound of champagne flutes clinking and voices rising. A few of my cousins had clustered by the fireplace, their laughter brittle with that particular strain of cruelty the Marin family had perfected long ago. "She thinks she's somebody now," one of them sneered, not even bothering to lower her voice. "Just because she's got a desk and a robe." Another chimed in, nasal and smug. "She's just playing dress up. Real success, that's in the blood." I didn't react, not visibly, but something inside me pulled tight. Not like a wound reopening. No. Like steel being sharpened. I turned and walked away without a word, letting the click of my heels serve as punctuation. The ballroom was already filling. A sea of florals too extravagant to be tasteful, chandeliers glittering like a stage set. Champagne poured freely. Servers moved like ghosts, refilling flutes, offering bites too delicate to satisfy. I lingered at the edge, watching Jameson hold court in front of the fireplace, his hand resting possessively on Catherine's waist, his smile just as rehearsed as it had always been. Catherine laughed at something he said, her eyes darting toward me, with a flash of uncertainty. Someone tapped a fork to a glass. The room quieted. Jameson turned, lifted his flute, that same practiced warmth coating his words. "I'd like to thank everyone for coming," he began, his tone rich with performance. "It means the world to have our family, all those who've carried the Marin name with pride, and our dear friends here tonight." Laughter, polite and performative. Then his gaze swept across the room and paused, barely, but deliberately on me. "We're grateful for all kinds of success stories," he added, "even those who think a black robe and a desk make up for, well, a real legacy." The laughter that followed this time had teeth. My grip tightened around the stem of my glass. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. If he was fishing for a reaction, he wasn't getting one. Not now. Not yet. I raised my glass, not in agreement, not in salute, but in a silent, deadly promise to myself. Never again. Never again would I let them define me. Never again would I shrink under their gaze. Never again would I offer my silence to protect their comfort. The pendant at my throat felt warm now, like it knew. The rest of the evening blurred. Polite conversation with sharp edges. Forced laughter. The clink of cutlery. But my mind was elsewhere, already moving, calculating. Because I wasn't here to blend in. I wasn't here to belong. I was here to bear witness. To history, to hypocrisy, to the storm that was building and hadn't yet broken. And they wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late. The air was heavy that next evening. The sky stretched in muted purples and slow-moving grays as twilight draped itself over Charleston like a soft curtain. I drove with the windows cracked open, the damp breeze curling around my fingers as I gripped the steering wheel. There was a war inside me, quiet but ferocious. Every breath was a negotiation, every heartbeat a reminder that I was about to face the one person who still had a key to the softest part of me. My mother. She had called the night before, her voice tentative and strained, as if she were afraid it might snap mid-sentence. I still wasn't sure why I answered. I had stared at the unknown number flashing on my screen, my thumb hovering over the decline button, logic hissing at me to leave it alone. But I didn't. I picked up. I listened. Avery, she had said, my name sounding foreign coming from her mouth. I was hoping, would you have dinner with me? Just the two of us. Before the wedding. There was a pause, like she was testing the silence for my reaction. Shah Rauso, she added quickly, like the name of the restaurant might sweeten the blow. Of course. The place where appearances were worshipped. Where the wine list mattered more than the words spoken across the table. I said yes. I heard myself say it before I could change my mind. And the second I hung up, I regretted it. Now, as I pulled into the tight parking lot behind the restaurant, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, calm, composed, distant. A woman who had learned to hold still when it mattered. Inside, Shah Rauso looked exactly as I remembered it. White tablecloths stretched taut over polished mahogany, waiters in starched aprons floating between conversations lit by soft candlelight. I spotted her almost immediately, sitting by the window with a trembling glass of white wine in her hand. She looked small somehow, folded into herself like a woman waiting for a verdict she didn't think would go in her favor. I crossed the room with measured steps, my heels tapping softly over the parquet. She half rose when she saw me, her smile flickering around the edges like it wasn't sure it belonged. Avery, she said. Just my name. No apology, no warmth. Just a label she hadn't used in 5 years. Mom, I answered, sliding into the chair across from her. A server approached. She ordered a salad she would barely touch. I asked for a black coffee I didn't need. We exchanged small talk like strangers at a bus stop. The weather, the wedding preparations, the traffic on King Street. None of it mattered. None of it reached the yawning chasm between us. The food came. It sat untouched. The wine glass trembled in her hand. My coffee went cold. Finally, she set her fork down with a soft clink and looked at me. I owe you an apology, she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of nearby diners. I didn't speak. I waited. Jameson, she hesitated, inhaled like the air itself resisted her confession. He told everyone you'd had a breakdown, that you left because you couldn't handle the pressure. Her voice cracked on the last word. He told Catherine. He told your aunts. Everyone. She twisted her napkin in her lap until the fabric strained. And her voice broke again. I didn't stop him. I thought if we didn't talk about it, maybe it would go away. I looked at her for a long time. The candlelight made her look older, softer, but I wasn't moved. Not by tears. Not by guilt. Not anymore. You didn't protect me, I said, my voice low but steady. You let them bury me. You helped. Tears rimmed her eyes, but I felt nothing. Not fury. Not grief. Just the cold, unblinking clarity of someone who had survived the worst of it alone. She reached into her purse, her hand shaking, and pulled out a small velvet box. This was always meant for you, she whispered, sliding it across the table. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside, nestled against dark velvet, was the pendant Grandpa had promised me after I passed the bar. Lady Justice, blindfolded, her scales perfectly balanced. I had assumed it had been lost.
Taken.
Forgotten. Jameson had it all these years, she said, her voice cracking again. While they erased you. I closed the box and slipped it into the inside pocket of my blazer, right over my heart. I didn't say thank you. I didn't forgive. Some things couldn't be bought back with heirlooms and late apologies. Some truths came too late to matter. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping lightly against the floor. She flinched at the sound, as if she hadn't expected it to end so quickly. I stood tall, pressing the cool pendant against my ribs. They buried me once, I said, voice quiet but unwavering. This time, I'm digging myself out, and I'm bringing the truth with me. Her lips parted, like she wanted to speak, but I was already walking. Across the floor, past the hushed tables and polished silver, out into the misty Charleston night where the air finally felt clean, lighter, like the city itself had exhaled something bitter. The rain had begun to fall again, soft and persistent, like a benediction. I walked toward the street, each step deliberate, each breath steadier than the last. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like the exiled daughter. I felt like something else entirely. Something unshakable. The morning of the rehearsal dinner arrived cloaked in a hazy, restless quiet, the kind that wrapped itself around my nerves like smoke. I stood in front of my closet longer than I should have, staring not at dresses or shoes, but at choices, versions of myself I could wear like armor. This wasn't about fashion. It was about strategy. What did you wear to face the family that tried to pretend you never existed? In the end, I reached for simplicity. A black sheath dress with sharp lines and subtle strength, not severe but not soft either, something that looked exactly how I felt, contained, composed, undeniable. I smoothed the fabric over my hips, slid the silver chain over my neck, and let the Lady Justice pendant settle just below my collarbone, its quiet weight pressing against my skin like a heartbeat I'd learned to steady on my own. The drive to the estate passed in a blur, Charleston's charm lost on me for once. I barely registered the pastel row houses or the smell of salt thick in the air. My mind hummed with a kind of rhythm that didn't come from nerves, but something more primal, a storm coil of clarity and anticipation. I pulled into the circular drive just as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting everything in a bronze haze that looked too romantic for what was about to unfold. Expensive cars lined the stone path, gleaming like trophies, their owners inside playing the part of perfect guests in a perfect life. I cut the engine, exhaled slowly, and stepped out. The moment I crossed the threshold into the estate, I felt it. The air shifted. Eyes turned. The temperature dropped a fraction of a degree. There was a subtle tightening in the atmosphere, the kind that happens when someone shows up uninvited to their own family stage play. I handed my coat to a young server in a crisp white jacket and moved forward, letting the marble floors guide me past the familiar portraits. Jameson as a child on Grandpa's lap, Jameson at his medical school graduation, Jameson opening the pediatric wing with a ribbon-cutting smile that didn't belong to the boy I used to know. And always him. Never me. I drifted into the side parlor where a few of the cousins had gathered, their voices too loud with champagne and old cruelty. She thinks she's somebody now, one of them said, her tone dripping with the same condescension I remembered from childhood. Just because she's got a robe and a bench doesn't mean she belongs here. Another voice joined in with a nasal laugh. She's just playing dress up. Real success is in the bloodline. The words didn't pierce me. Not anymore. They simply sharpened me, honed my focus. I didn't acknowledge them. I turned on my heel, straightened my spine, and let the click of my heels remind them that I was no longer the girl who flinched first. The gathering swelled as I entered the main ballroom. The light was too gold, too perfect, draped over massive centerpieces that looked more like funeral arrangements than floral decor. Platters of hors d'oeuvres lined a table so long it groaned under the weight of appearances. Champagne flowed freely. Laughter rose and fell in manic waves. I stayed at the edge, sipping water from a crystal tumbler, watching from behind the veil of my own silence. Jameson stood near the fireplace, surrounded by admirers, his arm looped around Catherine's waist with practiced ease. She laughed on cue, but her eyes kept flicking toward me, uncertain, flickering with something she couldn't quite place. Then came the clink of a fork against a champagne glass. The room hushed. Jameson raised his glass, his voice smooth as varnish. "I'd like to thank everyone for coming," he began, the cadence of his words polished by years of toasts and speeches. "It means the world to have our family here, those who carry the Marin name with pride, and our dear friends." Polite applause. Laughter. He paused, sweeping the room with his eyes until they landed briefly, predictably, on me. "We're grateful for all kinds of success stories," he added, with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Even those who think a black robe and a desk make up for, well, a real legacy." The laughter that followed stung no more than static. I didn't blink. I didn't sip my drink. I simply watched him, quiet as stone, while inside me something moved, slow, deliberate, powerful. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to flinch. But I had walked through worse to get here. I raised my glass, not to him, but to myself. Not in celebration, but in promise. There would be no more swallowing my truth to preserve their lies. No more retreating into silence so they could paint over my absence with shame. Never again. The rest of the evening passed like a fever dream. Empty compliments, forced conversation, the sound of silver against porcelain. But my mind wasn't here. I was already elsewhere, already planning. Because Jameson had made one mistake. He believed I had come to be part of their performance. He didn't know I had come with a script of my own. And soon, they would hear every word of it. Because I hadn't just returned. I had risen. And this time, I wasn't coming back quietly. The night air off the veranda was thick with salt and the kind of charged quiet that usually comes before a storm. I stepped away from the suffocating hum of the ballroom, from the syrupy toasts and the manicured lies and the familiar weight of being stared at like a crack in their porcelain family image. The harbor beyond the hedge was dark and endless, the water barely moving under the amber glow of the terrace lamps. I let my hands rest on the stone railing, grounding myself in the stillness, letting it cool the heat rising just under my skin. I wasn't alone for long. I didn't need to turn around to know who had followed me out there. There's a sound Jameson makes when he's trying to be casual. It's in the measured steps, the slightly exaggerated exhale, the way his shoes land like punctuation marks. He leaned against the rail beside me, his whiskey glass swirling lazily in his fingers, casting small shadows across his polished smile. "Quite the turnout, huh?" he said, that false warmth seeping through his words like honey laced with venom. "You've made quite the splash yourself, showing up all righteous, draped in that little pendant like it means something." I said nothing. I kept my gaze fixed on the water, steady and unreadable. He chuckled, the kind of low, smug laugh I had once feared. Still as silent as ever, Jules. "I always said you were good at pretending not to care." I turned toward him slowly, my voice calm, deliberate, razor-sharp without needing to shout. "One more public lie about me, Jameson," I said, watching his smirk falter for a split second, "and I won't stay quiet." He lowered his glass, blinking like he hadn't expected me to strike first. "You wouldn't dare," he said, but the confidence in his voice had a hairline fracture now. "You throw a fit, you look petty. You stay silent, you look polished. Either way, I win." I let the silence stretch between us, taut and unforgiving, let him soak in his own arrogance like a man standing on a frozen lake unaware the ice beneath him was beginning to crack. I didn't need to reply. I didn't need to argue. I just turned and walked back into the house, my heels clicking on the tile like a metronome counting down. By the next evening, the city blushed in streaks of gold and fire as I pulled into the circular driveway of the grand banquet hall, the rehearsal dinner's final act dressed in absurd opulence. The chandeliers inside sparkled like crowns, and the floors gleamed so bright they mirrored every lie told in their reflection. Every guest looked dipped in curated perfection. The Marins never did settle. The crowd buzzed with practiced charm, air kisses, and toothy grins stretched thin over politics and old money. I moved quietly, deliberately, the Lady Justice pendant resting just below my collarbone, catching the light every time I passed a candlelit table. People looked. They always did. Some nodded politely. Some whispered behind coops of champagne. Some stared with carefully measured pity. I didn't stop. I didn't slow. I saw Jameson on the far side of the room, holding Catherine close, as if her presence could shield him from whatever was coming. He caught my gaze for half a second and winked, as if the past 24 hours had never happened, as if he still believed I was bluffing. I found my assigned seat between two distant cousins who couldn't meet my eye. On the plate in front of me sat a neatly folded program. Welcome to the rehearsal dinner of Jameson Marin and Catherine Walsh. The front was perfectly innocuous. I flipped to the back, and there it was. A list of family accolades, a Marin tradition. There was Aunt Margaret's 2-year stint on a minor hospital board, Cousin Philip's second-place finish in a rowing competition, even Great-Uncle Charles's lifetime achievement in accounting. My name, of course, was missing. Not overlooked. Omitted. Deliberately. Strategically. The paper shook slightly in my hand, not from anger, but from the sheer force it took to stay composed. Across the room, Jameson lifted his glass in a mock toast, grinning like a man who thought he'd won. The crowd around him laughed, unaware, or maybe uncaring. I smoothed the program flat with both hands. My fingers brushed the pendant at my chest. No tears. No scene. Just a decision. It was time. While the speeches began, saccharine tributes to Jameson's brilliance, Catherine's elegance, I slipped my phone from my clutch beneath the tablecloth and typed one message to the only person who'd stood beside me through every storm. Maya, ready the documents. It's time. The message sent with a soft ping. I slid the phone back into my bag and reached for my glass, lifting it to my lips with deliberate calm. Across the room, Jameson tossed his head back in laughter at something Catherine said. He didn't notice the ground shifting beneath him, but he would. The night buzzed with that slow-building tension, the kind that lives in the base of your spine and reminds you you're closer to war than peace. I adjusted the collar of my dress, felt the pendant press into my skin like a seal, like a signature. Outside, Charleston air clung humid and sharp, like even the night itself knew something was coming. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reckoning. About truth cracking through the surface of their carefully curated world like lightning over still water. And they wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late. By the time I stepped back into my apartment later that night, the chandelier glow of the grand banquet hall had faded from my skin, but the pressure of what I had done, what I'd started, was still crackling in my bones. I kicked off my heels, unbuttoned my blazer with trembling fingers, and walked barefoot to the kitchen in search of nothing more than stillness and water. I had barely filled the glass when my phone, tossed carelessly onto the counter, began to buzz violently, like it had been waiting for me to let my guard down. The screen lit up. Headline after headline. Notifications stacking like a slow avalanche. And just like that, I saw it. The first shot fired. A smear campaign, fast and filthy. Not from the Times. Not from a legitimate paper. These were the vultures. Gossip blogs, low-tier tabloids that fed on scandal like roadkill. One headline blinked red across my phone screen. Disgraced judge accused of bullying her way into bench appointment. I stared, unmoving. Another alert popped up. Anonymous former classmates say Rowan Blake was emotionally unstable, obsessive. One after another, a digital pylon of everything they thought might stick. Old photos, misquoted rumors, carefully framed narratives with just enough distortion to seem plausible to those already inclined to doubt. The language was cautious. Nothing quite libelous. Just suggestive. Slick. Poisonous in the way it lingered in the back of someone's mind, planting seeds without offering evidence. But I knew this playbook. I'd seen it before. This was Jameson's style, cloaked aggression wrapped in charm and deniability. He wouldn't dare attack me in court, in public, in any space where facts could bite back. No, he'd slither through back doors, using money to whisper lies and smear the truth into something muddy and unrecognizable. And just like last time, he underestimated me. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I didn't call Maya, though I knew she was already reading the same headlines. I just exhaled, not a sigh of surrender, but of readiness. Jameson wasn't clever. He was obvious. And I had been preparing for this ever since I sent that RSVP. I walked to my desk, flipped open my laptop, and opened the folder labeled Contingency. Inside were press kits, court filings, verified appointment letters, endorsements, transcripts, receipts. The truth, beautifully documented, neatly archived, and ready to rise. At sunrise, while the city blinked into consciousness, my team released a single, devastating post across every one of my public channels. No long-winded rebuttal. No emotional pleas. Just a clear message rooted in fact. Attached were certified documents showing my court appointment process in full transparency, personal recommendations from senior judges and ethics boards, scanned commendations for community reform, awards from organizations Jameson had once courted himself. At the top of the post, in bold serif font, one quote: "Facts are stubborn things. John Adams." No hashtags. No emojis. Just truth, elegant and untouchable. The ripple effect was immediate. By noon, every major news outlet had picked up the story. Local talk radio crackled with commentary. "Did you see what they tried to do to Judge Blake?" someone said during a live broadcast. And she clapped back with hard receipts. Respect. Public defenders I'd worked beside in the trenches sent messages of support. Families I'd helped with housing cases posted gratitude. Former professors I hadn't spoken to in years published open letters defending my integrity. No one asked for them to do it. They simply rose. Because when the truth walks in the room, lies lose their shape. The most satisfying part wasn't watching the damage to me dissolve. It was watching his carefully crafted strategy blow up in his hands. Jameson's PR firm, one of those boutique agencies in Atlanta that specialized in reputation whitewashing, quietly dropped him by mid-afternoon. Too risky. Too messy. Donors began to pull back. Board members stopped returning calls. Bookings were canceled. Appearances postponed. And the Marin family? Oh, they did what they always did when the optics turned sour. They tried to disappear behind a wall of polite statements and weak smiles. But this time, their silence wasn't just cowardice. It was guilt. And the world saw it for exactly what it was. They hadn't just turned their backs on me. They'd enabled a lie. And now, they could stand in the crater they helped dig. Late that afternoon, after the official family brunch was abruptly postponed due to unforeseen circumstances, I found myself back at the estate. I wasn't sure why I went. Maybe I wanted to see it. The wreckage. Or maybe I wanted to stand on that perfectly manicured lawn and feel, for once, like the ground belonged to me too. The sky above was a furious shade of blue, streaked with bands of silver cloud, as if even the heavens weren't sure whether to mourn or celebrate. I wandered slowly through the gardens, past the koi pond, the rose beds, the statues imported from Europe, all the symbols they used to prove they were worthy of admiration. But all I saw now were facades. When I reached the edge of the property, I stopped. The breeze pulled strands of hair from my braid. Behind me, the house stood tall and glowing. But it felt smaller now, diminished, like it knew it had lost its power over me. And in the quiet, I smiled. Not from spite, but from certainty. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't surviving someone else's narrative. I was living mine. The days that followed didn't bring the kind of cinematic collapse you might expect. There were no courtroom outbursts, no televised apologies, no handcuffs glinting beneath the morning sun. Jameson's fall came quietly, efficiently, like rot beneath fine wood, silent, certain, and completely irreversible. It started with a board meeting, then a donor backing out, a speaking engagement suddenly rescheduled indefinitely. One by one, the polished pillars that held up his image crumbled in private, with clipped emails, hushed conversations, and sudden silences that used to be filled with admiration. His reputation, once handed to him like a birthright, was now tainted beyond rebranding. For the first time, the Marin family couldn't spin fast enough to outrun the truth. I heard whispers, of course, that he tried to pitch the narrative that he was misunderstood, that I had exaggerated, that it had all gotten out of hand.
But no one bought it this time.
The receipts were too loud. The silence from the family, once used to punish and exile, now spoke volumes of complicity. Their silence became the story. They hadn't just turned their backs when I walked away. They had helped bury me, built the perfect image on the absence of my name, and now they stood in the ashes of that choice. The calls started a few days later. A trickle at first, second cousins, distant aunts, family friends who had once nodded along with the whispers. Their voices came soft, uncertain, full of the kind of selective memory that always blooms when the spotlight shifts. "We always knew you were different, Emery." I never believed what they said. "You're stronger than all of them combined." Every word tasted like ash. Too little, too late. They had their chances to speak when it mattered. I didn't owe them another moment of my voice. I answered none of the calls. I needed no audience to validate the truth anymore. It stood tall without applause. Instead, I focused on the life I had built, the one far removed from champagne flutes and dinner parties where legacy mattered more than character. On the desk in my study sat a sealed envelope I had been staring at for weeks. A federal judgeship offer. It had come quietly, respectfully, without fanfare. I had earned it. Through years of defending those no one wanted to see. Through late nights reading case law in a studio apartment with peeling paint. Through stubborn grit and a refusal to let their shame become my shadow. It waited patiently, untouched, as I watched the last of the smoke clear around me. And when I finally picked up the pen and signed my name, my hand didn't tremble. Not because it wasn't hard, but because I wasn't asking for permission anymore. A year later, the sky over Charleston was tinted in the pale gold of early spring, the kind of light that makes everything feel possible again. I stood at the entrance of the Charleston Community Foundation Gala, the one I'd helped organize, and looked out over a sea of faces that had never once asked me to shrink. No velvet ropes. No golden surname requirements. Just community. Just truth. Inside the modest ballroom, laughter echoed with sincerity. The scent of jasmine hung in the air, thick and heady and alive. People clinked glasses, not for show, but in solidarity, in gratitude, in rebuilding. I wore a simple black gown that night. No designer label. No glittering stones. Just clean lines. Elegance born from purpose. Around my neck hung one thing, the pendant my grandfather gave me. Lady Justice, blindfolded, balanced, burning with quiet conviction against my skin. I moved through the room, nodding to faces that had once been strangers and were now something like kin. Public defenders, housing advocates, students who had once stood in my courtroom, terrified and trembling, and now wore their own names with pride. This was the legacy that mattered. Not bloodline, not inheritance, but choice, courage, integrity. Toward the end of the night, I found myself by the wide bay windows that overlooked the harbor. The city lights shimmered on the water like stars that had decided to sink closer to Earth. I touched the pendant lightly, felt its weight, and its meaning settle again into my chest. They tried to erase me. I whispered into the glass. I wrote a better story instead. And for the first time in years, I felt entirely mine. The sky had softened into that aching shade between gold and gray as I stepped off the estate's veranda for the last time. Behind me, the house blazed with artificial light, chandeliers glittering like they still believed this place mattered. But it didn't. Not anymore. It looked smaller now. Not physically, no. The marble and glass and imported grandeur still stood, but emotionally, spiritually, it had shrunk. It had already started to collapse beneath the weight of its lies the moment Catherine slipped the ring from her finger and laid it down like a verdict. The final toast still rang faintly in my ears. Jameson, standing at the center of a salon full of illusions, raising his glass with that same smug composure he wore like cologne, never realizing the words he'd polished to perfection would be drowned out by mine. She had looked right at me. Catherine, not a victim, not a woman broken, but a woman awakened. And she had said 2 words. Thank you. Not whispered. Not mouthed.
Spoken.
With clarity. With decision. That ring, delicate and diamond-studded, had glinted on the piano as she turned and walked out, straight, tall, free. Her silence afterward was louder than any speech I could have given. Jameson's voice had cracked. I remember that more than anything. It cracked, not in anger, not in remorse, but in disbelief. He had always been the one in control, hadn't he? The conductor of the family narrative, the chosen son wrapped in reputation and silk ties. But this time, he had nothing to say that could save him. And I didn't need to look back. I never looked back. I left him standing in the same house where they erased me, where they celebrated my exile, where they told the world I was unworthy. The irony that it collapsed on the night they thought they'd shine brightest. There was no sweeter justice than that. I walked to my car, heart steady, not racing. This wasn't victory. Not in the dramatic, triumphant way people expect. This was reclamation. This was peace forged from scorched ground. But somewhere, deep down, I knew he wasn't finished. Jameson wasn't the type to accept loss, even when it was dressed in evidence and spoken through public support. I knew he'd come for me. Maybe not directly, but in the way cowards do. So when I got home and saw my phone vibrating against the kitchen counter, I knew before I even looked that the next phase had begun. Headlines.
Dozens of them.
Not from reputable sources, of course, but the bottom feeders. The tabloids. The blogs that don't care about accuracy, only traffic. Former classmates speak out. Delaney Rhodes emotionally unstable, difficult to work with. Anonymous source claims judge used influence to gain bench. Photos I hadn't seen in years, taken from terrible angles, frozen mid-blink, doctored to look like scandal. The stories were all the same, vague, venomous, impossible to disprove because there was nothing real to disprove. The whispers he hoped would stain. But I wasn't playing defense anymore. I didn't pace the kitchen. I didn't make a single phone call. I simply sat down, opened the folder Maya and I had built together in quiet anticipation, and released the truth. With no fanfare, no apology, just documentation, dates, certification. Federal appointment letters, formal endorsements, press coverage from real outlets. Screenshots of my housing justice work. Testimonies from families who would have been homeless without intervention. And at the top, one quote, "Facts are stubborn things." John Adams. I went to sleep before the first wave of public support began. By morning, the internet had already turned.
Not on me.
On him.
On them.
Columnists wrote op-eds calling the smear campaign desperate and outdated. Lawyers I'd mentored came forward. Clerks, defendants, students, judges, my community, rose without being asked. Jameson's team scattered. His PR firm dropped him. His name, once pristine, became a cautionary tale for men who build their reputations on the ruins of others. And the Marins? They tried to stay silent, but this time, silence wasn't an escape. It was admission. They had written me out. Now they had to live with what the world wrote back in. A few days later, I walked the estate alone. Not for nostalgia, not for sentiment, but for closure. The breeze tugged at my coat as I crossed the lawn. The koi pond was still pristine. The marble statues still stood. But it all looked staged now. Museum-like.
Hollow.
And when I saw Catherine walking toward me, dressed in jeans and a plain blouse, her face stripped of pretense, I stopped. She didn't speak right away. She didn't offer apology. She simply held out her hand. Not with guilt. Not with pity. With solidarity. I looked at it. I took it. Her grip was firm. Not the grip of someone asking for permission. The grip of someone walking forward. She turned and left, her shoulders lighter, her pace unhurried. I watched her go. Not with envy. Not with pity. But with understanding. And when I walked back to my car, I felt it, the shift. The world no longer tilted beneath my feet. It aligned. The fallout was not dramatic. Jameson's decline didn't crash, it unraveled. The silence from his allies was louder than any scandal. Doors that used to open for him stayed closed. Appearances were canceled. Recommendations retracted. And the family brunch? Quietly erased from the schedule. No explanation offered. People called. People who'd once applauded my disappearance. You were always meant for more, Delaney. I always knew you'd prove them wrong. I answered none of them, because the truth had already done everything I needed it to do. And for once, I didn't have to say a word.